So the global water crisis is a lot worse than what people thought it was. Um, so here I was looking, there are so many articles coming out about climate change and the effects that are already happening. And we're in the middle of that. And so climate crisis is really bad. So this is by a Fiona Harvey, environment and correspondent, and this was Tuesday the 17th, 2021. So it's just really scary that a lot of these things are happening and you don't really have enough action or quick enough action on these issues, and I believe it is far too late. That's my opinion. Um, they try to every now and again put in something optimistic, but the way that our governments are worried about this war and worried about all of these other events that are taking place, those things have now taken their attention off of some of the most crucial things that can affect the whole world. The war is also another issue that is going on, and it is actually a lot worse than what the news is reporting. And so I wanted to put that in there. Um, also, it's going to really impact a lot of people, not just the people in Russia and Ukraine, but a lot of people worldwide. So global water crisis will intensify with climate breakdown, and this is said in a report. And so right now the UN has been meeting, and they've been having multiple meetings about how to resolve some of these issues, but these things have happened so often, but yet you have very little action on it. So flooding, droughts, wildfires will worsen as the global heating disrupts the planet's water cycle. So it's all connected. And so if you've noticed that we've had a lot of those issues that have happened, like crazy weather that you just wonder, why is it even hotter? Why is it even this cold at this time like this? Why are we having such ponding of the rain, where there's flooding? I've seen it in LA where there's streets that look like you can't even drive over them because there's water that it's like a pool, and you can't drive over it because you're afraid your car's going to get sunken in there. And so nobody's really understanding where all this is coming from, but this is where it's happening. And so it's really scary. But we're in the middle of not only a war that is really, they're not saying it's World War III. And we are also dealing with an apocalyptic event that is occurring with quickness. And so water problems, drought, with its accompanying wildfires, flooding, are likely to become much worse around the world as climate breakdown takes hold, according to the biggest assessment of climate science to date. So global heating is at 1.5 Celsius, so it's likely to happen within the next 2 decades, which that's not really that far off. So according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, temperatures are rising, and they will be accompanied by big changes in the planet's water cycle, with areas that are already wet becoming much wetter and already arid areas becoming prone to greater droughts. Extreme rainfall intensifies by 7% for each additional 1 Celsius of global heating. The report has found this. So Professor Mike Meredith, he's a science leader at the British Antarctic Survey and a lead author for the IPCC, said as the atmosphere continues to heat up because of global heating, it can hold and transport more moisture. So at the largest scale, we expect to see an acceleration of hydrological cycle. Okay, so stronger evaporations in the tropics and more intense rainfall in high latitudes and some equatorial regions. And so this will lead to more frequent extreme rainfall events in already wet areas and a greater incidence of severity of flooding. So there is already strong evidence that we are seeing such changes. And I have seen it even in the cities where we'll have a rain and there's some streets, and I know that they don't really clean the sewage like they should, and some of that might have came in because of COVID, because people are throwing away gloves and masks. So some of the people don't want to handle that stuff because they look at it as being contaminated. And they've said that in the wastewater, they've seen that disease. And so you have a lot of stuff going on. So I'm including this in what I've been reading about global climate change. There's a lot of groups that are like cult groups. They're very angry. They have been rallying groups together. They've been fighting against mask mandates. They've been fighting against the fact that COVID even exists. There has been people who have even denied that racism even is an issue. They've been book banning. All of these things are connected. It's scary and it's very violent. There is a war going on with Russia, um, where they've invaded Ukraine. And recently there was a hashtag called Africans in Ukraine. And so yesterday I saw a news woman, anchor woman, who were really denying that there was any harsh treatment of the Africans, that they weren't being denied access to help and care. Although, despite her saying that, people that are over there that have covered it, that are Africans, have said that they've been denied access to get on vehicles, and they have seen other people of Ukraine, white people, have preferential treatment, which is not really a surprise to me, because the police here in the U.S., we've had incidences where we had the George Floyd incident. We've had several incidences that have been one after the other where Black people and citizens of the U.S. have been gunned down by police over as simple as a traffic stop or expired tags. So it doesn't really surprise me that a lot of these things are all coming together. And now you have them scrambling at the UN and officials trying to figure out how they can lower the temperature by, cutting emissions. But I'm afraid we are going to see some really catastrophic events, and they've already started. So back to this article, there's already strong evidence that they're seeing such these changes. So in some dry regions, droughts will become worse and longer lasting. Such risks are compounded by knock-on consequences such as greater risk of wildfires that we are seeing right now. So Professor Ralph Toomey, co-director of the Grantham Institute of Climate Change at Imperial College London, said the principle of the warmer world is that more water will be evaporated, which will exacerbate droughts, and it enhances the water in the atmosphere that will increase the amount of rainfall when it does rain. So it all connects. So the effects will be felt across the globe. This is not just in one city, not just in one state, but everywhere. And it is happening in real time. And so from the US, where droughts is an increasing problem in the west and south, to India, where the monsoon may become more variable, Sub-Saharan Africa is also likely to experience increased droughts in many areas, while flooding and drought will hit China and Europe. And so you're going to see events that look like this. Parts of the Var riverbed have dried up, and this is happening right now. Environmental Protection Agency's photographist Sebastian Nogier. Okay, so uh, Ian Kelman, professor of disaster and health at University College London, said that climate change will make wet and dry regions more extreme, soil moisture will go down, and dry spells will go up in already arid regions such as the Mediterranean, the southern Africa, and seasonal rainfall variability is expected to increase with fewer days of rainfall alongside increased intensity of downpours. Changes to the planet's natural rainfall patterns are one of the biggest impacts of climate crisis, and the landmark IPCC report, which was published last week, contains more than 200 pages of the issue alone. A fuller discussion of the expected impacts of climate crisis on water will come next February in the second part of their report. Okay, and so the sixth of the World Authority on Climate Science since 1988, but the findings so far contain the starkest warnings yet the problems the world faces. And so you're going to see things that you had never seen before. And some of us are already seeing that. And I'm just panning through some of the pictures. And if you want to find this, no water, no life, running out of water in California, Oregon border. And so you're starting to see effects that are starting to happen. And people are fighting. They're using racism to try to discriminate people, laws to try to discriminate people. They're writing in laws that were changed to try to bring equity and unity, and they're trying to stop people from voting. They're using tactics of voter ID, all of this hateful stuff coming right at a time when the whole world is in crises. And so the monsoon in the south of Asia, which is a key of the lives and the agricultures of more than 1 billion people, is a particular source of concern, as are glacier-fed areas where first flooding and then water scarcity are likely to become increasingly common as glaciers shrink. Okay, and some smaller glaciers are disappearing altogether. So the IPCC are cautious about the potential impacts of monsoons, with some studies pointing to potential weakening and some to strengthening. So monsoons are likely to become more variable uh, in the future. And so on the one hand, we know that for a given monsoon, wind patterns there will be more rain, but the monsoon wind pattern may weaken. So the net effect is uncertain. And this is said by Atumi. And so this is what we've been seeing. They have not really shown a lot of this. Some news outlets have shown this, but they make it seem like they're isolated incidences. So be careful of that. It isn't isolated because these weather patterns, although they happen differently in other regions, they all are connected with global warming. And so Dr. Andy Turner, associate professor in monsoon systems at Reading University and a lead author at the IPCC, said that particularly for the monsoons in the South and the Southeast East Asia, the Central Sahel, in Africa, monsoon precipitation is projected to increase by the end of the century. And so this is very troubling. And so, however, near-term monsoons, you know what a monsoon is? Flooding. Exponentially, like you would not believe. What you just saw up here, people actually in boats. This is not a city that normally has this. You're going to see it in regular cities, in metropolitan cities, where flooding will take place. And so each additional degree of warming will exacerbate frequency and severity of extreme weather events in monsoon regions that are prone to that, such as periods of heavy rainfall, flooding, and drought. In other regions that you think, wow, it's usually warm, it's going to be even hotter. And so hundreds of millions of people also depend directly for their water and agriculture. And these are also likely to be among the water systems worst affected. So Roger Braithwaite, honorary senior research fellow at University of Manchester, said that measurements show glaciers in many parts of the world currently have negative mass balances, even with present global mean temperatures. So glaciers are therefore not safe under the Paris Agreement, which limits warming to 1.5 Celsius as an ambition and 2 Celsius as an outer limit. So Meredith added glaciers worldwide have retreated since 1990s. That's a long time that has passed. So that's why we're seeing the wild weather that we're experiencing. This is unprecedented in at least 2 millennia. And so it is clear signals that impacts of global warming heating has taken place for many communities downstream. High mountain glaciers are fundamental to their way of life, providing a reliable source of fresh water for drinking and irrigating crops. And so as the glaciers continue to retreat, initially the strongest melt will cause greater risk of floods, avalanches, landslides, and direct hazards for those living downstream. In due course, the decrease of fresh water available will shrink or will shift to the risk of being that of a drought. And I was right, it's going to shrink. You're going to see droughts in areas, more fires, more hurricanes, more monsoon flooding in areas that are prone to that, and who knows what else will come thereafter. And so the millions of people who live downstream of major mountain glacier systems, such as the Himalayas, this is an extreme concern of their lives and livelihood. And so you're going to see where these things are going to get worse over time, and the news media is not going to be able to lie their way out of it. They're going to have to report it. And people are going to start taking notice when they see things that don't look right, that look extreme or apocalyptic. And they're going to say, you're not telling the truth. You need to be honest and say that this is going to affect everyone. No matter what color, no matter what group you're from, you're going to feel it. And so this is what happens when people don't unify, when they don't pay attention, when they put up videos that these things are not real. They are real, and we're going to see it. So the impacts of water systems are already bringing devastation to millions of people around the world, worsening poverty, disrupting societies, and turning life into daily struggle for some of those most vulnerable. This is said by Jonathan Farr, senior policy analyst for climate change at the charity Water Aid. He pointed to Malawi and the second biggest Lake Chilwa in Central is essential to the lives to 1.5 million people. And so while its levels have already fluctuated, it's now happening more frequently and to the greater extremes affecting the local communities. Women, most often responsible for securing water for their families, can often queue at the borehole for many hours, sometimes through the night, but waiting for the levels of refill to the point where they can draw water. So governments meeting the UN COP26 climate summit in Glasgow in November must take action, not just on greenhouse gas emissions alone, but also providing funding for poor nations to adapt to the impacts of the climate crisis that are already being felt and seen, he added. And so this is pretty much the article. And so you can look at what has happened thus far. You can see places that are prone to monsoons get worse, mudslides getting worse, and this war is not going to make anything any better at all. It's expensive, and also I want to add, even though this article is about climate change, there has been an alert about that war that three of the U.S. power grids could be wiped out. There's threats from Russia. They claim there isn't going to be anything to worry about, but when you hear "don't worry," you should kind of worry. You should kind of worry. So that's what we're seeing. That's what we're up against. And so all these stories that people are putting out, don't worry, everything's going to be all right, and go on as normal. We are the citizens, the casualties. Poor nations, poor communities are going to feel the impact and the brunt of most of this, unfortunately. So be on the lookout and pay attention to what is going on, because they're not being forthright, they're not being honest about what is happening. Some of those news people that are in Poland, they're only showing you pictures of people that are in one area, and they're all from the same background. If you look on Twitter and you look on some of the other people that have reported, you see all these Africans that have been hurled together. That's not by accident. And they hadn't been allowed to get on or go off or go in certain places. That's not by accident. Look how they treat African Americans that are here in the U.S. Think about it. Think about what's happening right now. Think about how they have been treating some of the other groups, all the racism, how they've been treating Asian people, how they've been treating Jewish people. Somebody's been putting out leaflets blaming the Jews for COVID. That's been happening. There's been stuff scrolled on playground parks where kids play, racial slurs about Black people. And this is not by accident. We are going through something. It's not only a civil war, but it's going to be World War III, and it has started. And they're not saying this. The news is not really saying what's really going on. That this war, they are also trying to take over what's going on over here as well. It's getting crazy. They've already imposed real crippling sanctions towards Russia. And so they've been having Russian residents go to ATMs and try to hurry up and get as much money as they can, because they're closing off currencies. So people, you need to really understand what's going on. They're not really bringing out what's really happening. And this affects everyone, no matter who you are.